today. My name is Ben Stapley. I'm the Weekend Experience Director at Christ Fellowship Miami. I also got a chance to consult and coach about creativity and leadership at benstapley.com. But today, I am joined with an incredible panel of all-star church leaders. These are people with skin in the game who are putting their theory into practice. I'm very excited because today we're going to be talking about creating a great worship experience, and mainly from the focus of production, which during COVID-19 has been a big influence and a big factor for a lot of churches. So before we jump into our questions and what we're going to discuss, let's have the panel introduce themselves first.
Hey, my name is Caleb Lepke. I am the production director for a multi-site church in Chicagoland, and I lead on the core team with Philo Conference, doing the breakouts and leading some of the staffing division.
Hi, I'm Dara Samuels. I am from Christ Fellowship Palm Beach Gardens. I'm one of the production managers for the Royal Palm Beach location.
And my name is Ed Ramirez. I am the video director at Liquid Church, multi-campus in church in New Jersey.
Hi, my name is Garrett Silgi, and I serve as the production director at a multi-site church, Christ Fellowship Miami, where Ben is.
Hi, my name is Jacob. I direct at a couple churches here in the Bay Area, California, primarily Menlo Church and Venture Christian Church. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And again, we're going to have a great panel discussion here. For those who are viewing, I strongly encourage you, if you haven't done it already, follow those people. They know what they're talking about. You're going to get great information during this conversation, but even more by networking with them as well. So a lot of churches are moving towards reopening. That being said, there's a lot of churches who still haven't reopened or are going to be postponing even till the following year. So the first question I had for us is, from a production standpoint, what have we found while we've been exclusively online to be working? Would love to hear that from you guys.
Sure, I'll go first. So one of the things that we did at Christ Fellowship was we actually switched our entire experience to going from recording in a broadcast style look with broadcast cameras to capturing it with cinematic cameras. And it's something that we had talked about, but we finally took the time that we were closed to be able to start experimenting with it. And we enjoyed the look. It was more intimate. It was more worshipful. It also allowed us to break the 1080i barrier. So we were able to break into 1080p and really be able to capture full HD quality. And then so the next step for us will be taking that and then producing it in a live style of experience.
That was great. I'll probably ask some follow-up questions as we go. Garrett, was that something that was on the agenda for you guys, or did it come up because of COVID?
Yeah, so it was something that we have been talking about and exploring for probably about a year now, maybe even 2 years. And so it was something that was on our radar, and COVID just ushered that sooner. And so it ushered us into experimenting with it faster than we were originally planning. We were planning to ride out our existing cameras until legs fell off. And so we just moved the timeline up on that.
That's good. Yeah, I think COVID moved up a lot of our production timetables, right? Like, we need this now. Ed, what were you going to say?
No, following up on that, essentially, when we think about the service experiences, generally our minds essentially go to our live experiences, right? Our physical. I mean, we think of church. I mean, your mind doesn't immediately go to online. And so when COVID happened, of course, all churches went online. And of course, we've all been experiencing what that exactly means and the diversity of what that actually means. But essentially online for a lot of churches before COVID, it was essentially like a very nice thing to have. But when it's the only thing you have, all of a sudden all eyes are on you, right? All eyes are on production, all eyes are on transitions, all eyes are on basically, think of this 15 to 20 second rule. You will be scrollable, if you will. If you're not captivating in 15 to 20 seconds, people are going to just go ahead and scroll down. Now, you see, physically, you can't do that, right? You come here, you're already committed to a seat. But when you're online, one of the things that we've been kind of making sure is that there's no fluff within our services, that whatever it is that we put online is essentially what needs to be out there that's going to captivate the audience, right? So content-wise, I think has been very important from a production standpoint to continue to emphasize the content. If it's the preacher, If it's a teaching pastor, if it's the hosting or worship, hey, like sure, 3.5 songs would be nice. Can we do 2.5? Because we don't have more than 40 or 50 minutes with an audience. I'd even say even 20 to 30 if we were to be honest. But coming from an hour and 15, an hour, 30-minute service, kind of like reeling that back to 50 to 60 minutes has been challenging. But at the same time, we see the results of that.
I think for us, and that's something that Garrett also talked about, we had to really change our mentality and think we're not IMAGing. So the way we directed our services, we had to really focus on broadcast, what's going to be attractive for the audience. And, I feel like in this season, there was a lot of church hopping. You can scroll to another church and watch their service. And then if you missed yours, you can go tomorrow and watch any other church. So we really had to start thinking, how can we really engage that audience? We added some hosting moments before our service to engage people who wanted to be early to church, and even throughout the service, kind of including things that could be more interactive for people as they were watching service. And for us, we're also multi-site. So the whole production staff was now at our broadcast site. So all the production managers became camera ops, and we were really just learning together and really learning how to pivot in this season and making sure that every piece of content that went out had a purpose. And it wasn't just a cool idea that we just wanted to test, but it really had a purpose to keep our audience engaged and really provide a really good experience for them in those few minutes we had them.
That's great. We can only use the word pivot once in the conversation. You used it already, so no one else can use it the rest of the time. Only once. For those who are familiar with IMAG, image magnification, the difference between that and broadcast. Just give us one. I'm sure there's lots, but just give us one in terms of how you captured the experience, because you were thinking more from a broadcast mindset and less from an IMAG perspective.
I think one of the things that we really had to do, especially when working with our worship leaders, was really making them aware. Now you're not looking at a person in the room, you're looking at a camera. And there's a person, there's a name, there's a story behind that camera. So when you're leading to that. So really coaching them to, it might be a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning to feel like you're singing to a camera, but that's where your audience is at now. So really coaching them kind of where to look at, not in a very robotic way, but still making them aware, now that's your audience right now. So that's one of the things we did with our team.
I think when you look at being online exclusively and that factor of us scrolling on our phones on a Sunday morning and the ability to watch a bunch of different services, the way that we're capturing video and the way that looks is what is going to stop and make people click unmute on that Facebook feed. And so for us, it was, what does the video look like over the audio? Because unfortunately, people are still watching on their phones in some ways, and audio is extremely important in what we're doing. But what is that initial look that makes them stop, that then they unmute and then they start watching and get more engaged? And so the idea of, in the same way, if you're coming from 1080i to 2997 or 23 or 24 frames, it was the way of what can we do to change this look that makes it feel more intentional and makes it feel more cinematic. We've already had people mention that, to get people to stop and watch. It was, I think that's a huge key for anybody that was exclusively online in the season.
That's good, Caleb. Jacob, bring it home. What was a big improvement for you guys while you've been exclusively online?
Yeah, so our big thing was I'm going to speak mostly from the Menlo perspective on this regards. So with Menlo, one of the big things we did was get them out of the room. Because people aren't in room, no one's in the sanctuary. So why should we have what traditionally is this big church mindset of, moving lights and, well, with us it's stained glass, but which is also kind of weird. We're also in a world where we come from this traditional Presbyterian style of stained glass, which is weird because it's not my background at all. I come from more of the charismatic realm of things, and so how can we make that transition? How can we make things feel more modern but still relatable? So we got everything out of the room. We started that with Easter. So we actually went to one of our smaller locations, shot everything in an extremely cinematic style, multicam with a bunch of Ursas. Looked really good. And then we repeated that now where we're actually going to different locations every week. So, but yeah, that's one of the big things we try to do is get out of the room.
That's good. I heard
just
a
to,
lot of. Go for it.
just to follow up on that, was it difficult to? This is just from my perspective, because I was actually my team and the creative team were trying to. Yeah, you can't use that pivot word, but try to tell our teaching team, hey, and even our worship team, can we get off of the auditorium? From a technological standpoint, everything is set up there. So it was very easy to make a decision of, like, especially because of bandwidth issues, we can't be getting out of that room to do worship or teaching. Was it hard to kind of like make that transition into getting out of that room?
Yeah, I would say not exactly. So one of the big things we did was kept our camera chain small, and also go to an edit versus a live taping. The goal is to still make it feel somewhat live, even though it's very realistic. It's not, which is also a complete. On the other side of this, we also shoot something for our youth services every week, which has about 600 kids there weekly, and that is completely live. Much more like, Elevation's doing, talking with hosts, everything else. We still have hosts, we still have those things on an edit perspective, but again, it just doesn't. It's more of a different feel. It's more of a cinematic storytelling perspective. So we went 3 cameras. What we do is we take like an ATEM, small ATEM, and do a line cut there, which for the most part is what we take. We don't do a whole lot of post editing. Sometimes during sermon, we'll do a little bit more editing, but for the most part, it's just a line cut. So you just merge everything together in post. Makes things editing wise a lot easier.
Makes sense. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that.
That's great, Jacob. For a couple of reasons. You're bringing context into this conversation from Menlo, a higher church, a more liturgical style, which is helpful because, let's be honest, you don't have to have Hayes to do production. Like, some people think, like, I'm not a production director, or I'm not as good because we don't have all the lasers and all the light shooting. But every church has a layer of production that they feel ultimately helps them accomplish their goal and their mission. And one church standard of production versus another, it's not a comparison of you're doing it better. You're just using a different style to accomplish your goal and your mission. So I love you speaking into that. Sometimes I feel there's a false inferiority complex where people think, like, I'm not as good because I don't have a huge LED wall behind my speaker, or whatever it might be. So thanks for speaking into that. Let's adjust. There's like no other good word than pivot. Let's adjust, and let's look. The next conversation topic here is, so we talked about what worked. I now want to talk about what didn't work. And this is mainly because I feel that in my own life and in people around me, we had the most growth when we go through trials of testing and failure. Failure oftentimes brings out the best results in us. You don't want to go through it, but oftentimes you come out on the better end, stronger because of that. So tell me one area in which you failed while exclusively online, and you had to come out of that. What's something that you tried, but it just didn't work?
I can go first because I'm actually tagging a little bit off of what Jacob was just describing. At the beginning of COVID, when we were all online, we felt like pre-recording too far in advance felt like we weren't paying attention to the world that was around us, to where our state is at, to where what's happening in Chicagoland, which I think was the right call. And then one of the things that we tried to do was very similar to what Jacob was saying. We were actually trying to film in each one of our 7 campuses across Chicago. And so somebody called me and said, hey, we want to do this week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how involved? And it was like, okay, we're just going to start with an acoustic and whatever. And over the course of 12 weeks, it turned into a couple pieces of gear that was fitting in some of my guys' like backseat of the car, to we're pulling a trailer across Chicago with a full production, consoles and switchers and cameras and stuff like that. And so it was a great idea. It was extremely complicated and added a ton of layers of complexity to us. And we tried to make that as simple as possible by, like what you said, like we were using a lot of the recorded stuff as much as we possibly could off the switcher. We were still ISOing all the cameras, but that was only in case, like, man, we totally screwed up on one of these shots, and the editor can kind of go back and fix some of that stuff. But and we were doing this all on Thursdays. And so our turnaround was pretty tight for a Saturday service. And so it was about, we would see the first edit sometime Friday evening, And between 5 p.m. and midnight, there was changes, and then hopefully wait for Dropbox. And if I can get it, sometime late that evening, hopefully it's up by Saturday morning. And sometimes we see a last minute thing and we're like, how many hours is the render? What can we do? So that caused some things. I think it was a great idea, but it was really hard. And I think we learned a lot from it. And now being back in our spaces for my team, it was an enormous relief. And we feel like we can do our jobs better because we're focusing more on that and not solving problems in the moment to try to make it crappen. You know what I'm saying?
I think we experienced what you were just talking about. We came into the season really wanting to plan ahead. And the first week we recorded about 6 weeks worth of worship. And we very quickly realized, this is changing very quickly. And we started making tweaks, and we started realizing what the audience needed before COVID is different. And worship is such a big piece of our services, and we needed to make those changes. So, I started thinking this is kind of like our detour. We're in this road trip all together, and we kind of set out to drive like high beams. We can see everything. We thought we knew everything we needed, so we planned it all ahead. And then we quickly realized we're actually driving with a low beams. We can only see a little bit ahead of us. So yes, we wanted to keep planning, but we realized, we just need to really analyze what's happening in the world, like you guys were saying, and really see what our audience is needing right now and what our worship should be looking like in this season, how to make it more personal. So needless to say, we didn't use the 6 weeks worth of worship that we had pre-recorded, but we learned a whole lot about what we really needed to be doing in this season and kind of slow down a little bit and start processing a little bit different.
Dara, I love that. Driving with the low beams on. I'm stealing that from your girl. That's perfect. That's great. Ed, I know Liquid never does anything wrong whatsoever. But if they did make one mistake, what was it?
No, humbly, I think that once we went COVID, again, our focus, right? We're a multi-campus church. Our focus is to saturate the state of New Jersey with the gospel of Jesus Christ. How do we do that, right? We do that through campuses. We believe that campuses, putting campuses next to folks where they're at generates new Christians, if you will. Like they have a way to connect with a community, thus with Christ through that community. And so again, online was like an afterthought, not necessarily in production ways. I think we gave it our best shot to put the best foot forward, putting what we had online. But I think that overall, what didn't necessarily work is that because all of the creative team's eyes went onto online, including the lead team and everybody, there was so much attention to detail. And so the video team that I'm a part of, a video director here, the service director and whatnot kind of like captured some of the worship and teaching environment. But the moment that got captured and it was time for the video team to kind of piece it all together, sometimes we would go through early on through COVID online. We had like 3 or 4 revisions of the hour and 10-minute experience. And I think that the word I'm going to go for here is that we have to be careful about perfectionism. Very easily you can get into this, it just needs to be just perfect. And I started seeing from a perspective of resources, since, I oversee 2 video producers, that not only myself was I kind of like working the 55, 65-hour weeks, but also my folks, right? And so I was like, no, this can't be good. From an hour and 10-minute experience to blast not only my team, but also the other team members in the creative team, I said, I raised a flag in a couple of our meetings and saying we have to start, bringing a couple of notches down on our perfectionistic approach to having everything be perfect. At the end of the day, the folks that are tuning online aren't looking for perfectionism. As a matter of fact, they're actually looking for authenticity, right? They're looking for, can you just be honest with me? And sometimes, as you might know, vlogging is a big deal on YouTube, and the reality behind that, it's because it's real. Like there is no editing. Obviously there's editing in post, but there's a very human element to what they're doing. And so that is one thing that I said, if it's not distracting, that's the word that I use for making changes. If it's not, and it could be subjective at some point, but if it's not distracting enough from a guest perspective, we might not be changing it. So any suggestions we get from other departments, if it's from a service direction or creative side, we very kindly decline making changes, because once something the teaching portion gets recorded at 4 or 5 p.m. on Thursday, our goal is to get it out by 9-10 p.m. that same night. Make any changes before noon that Friday afternoon, and then just kind of like have a normal week by wrapping it up by Friday afternoon. So anyway, the perfectionistic approach was, I think, something that it creeped into our culture a little bit once COVID started, but I think we kind of like nailed it, where we said as a team, like, yeah, that's right, your resources is very limited right now, and we should be very, very careful about going with a perfectionistic mentality towards this.
That's great, Ed. I felt the same thing. Normally, we would do a service. I'm sure everyone does a service review, debrief, autopsy, and normally for us, we'll focus on first what worked, and we'll celebrate that, and then what didn't. And we found over the weeks and months that list of what didn't work, it was getting long, and it was nitpicky, and I had to step, and I was leading that nitpick, and I had to pause it and say, guys, it's way too much. I know there's a value you guys have at Liquid. Ed, what is it in terms of excellence and perfectionism?
Well, we have three values, right? You trust each other. We do things with humility, and our third one is excellence, right? So, at the end of the day, you could very much say we do things with excellence, but eventually you're kind of like doing it with perfection. So I think you have to really, really navigate that well, so that you go into it with the best of intentions for it to come out as great as possible, but checking your heart at the end of production and saying, you know what, that was great enough because it's going to bless somebody at the end of the day.
That's good. Yeah, choosing excellence over perfection all the time. I think a lot of people hearing this probably need to be reminded of that going into this fall season. Garrett and Jacob, what's something that you guys did not do that worked well?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, one of the big things we ran into, it was because we're doing one of the big things that happened in our church was we're doing a senior pastor transition during the middle of COVID as Menlo. And so for me, it became not so much of how can we be the most creative service. It became how can we help our senior leadership and our board and our denomination speak through this and communicate this. And so that was definitely for me one of the things that I said I open up and just be like, all right, for me, I need to step back on the creative side a little bit and just see how I can help them communicate.
Let's go. Two more questions. I want to keep the conversation moving. So you guys are going to be, if you haven't reopened, you're looking towards reopening. Give us one or two best practices when it comes to production as you guys are looking to reopen. What are you trying to do? Wait, Garrett. Wait a second. Nice try. You sat there. You sat there silently. I don't need to answer this question if he just moves on. Tell us about something you did wrong, Garrett. Come on now.
Sure. So I told you my introverted tendencies would show themselves. So similar to Ed, we don't often experiment without doing like a lot of due diligence ahead of time and like thinking through things. And so there wasn't a lot of failures. I tried asking the guys like, what do you think would be our biggest mistake in COVID that we did and that we gave up on? And I got a lot of results back saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's like Ed, it's not like from a pride aspect. It's we don't experiment often. It's not that we don't experiment, but when we do, we put a lot of thought into it ahead of time. But the biggest thing that I could say that as a like producing a service that we tried and we didn't like and we changed the direction on is at the beginning of COVID, we said that we wanted to keep all aspects of the service in the same area, in the same environment. Because we thought that would be the most engaging thing for the audience. And then as time went on, we started realizing a lot of what Ed was mentioning, it didn't necessarily matter how polished it was. It mattered more the authenticity. And so then what we did was we took our hosting and we said, you know what, we don't need to be recording where we record worship and message. We're going to take our hosting and we're going to throw them out in our congregation, like in their neighborhoods. And so we started recording out in front of our different campuses. We started recording in front of different city halls around Miami because it was more authentic. It was more of like, hey, I go to that campus. I know exactly where that is, rather than always seeing the broadcast campus for every aspect of the service. And so it took us a little bit longer than we would have liked to figure that out. And once again, it was us projecting on our congregation what we thought was best for them, or what we thought was the most engaging experience for them. And when we sat back and realized, no, that's what we thought was best, but that's not really what our congregation would really feel comforted and looking for.
That's good. And just to piggyback off that, one of the other things at Christ Fellowship was a lesson that we learned along the way through failure was at the beginning we were chasing the spectrum, right? We were chasing novelty. What are we going to do differently this weekend? Where are we recording the message from this weekend? Where are we going on location? And like you were talking about earlier on, Caleb, that was exhausting. And out of that, we swung the pendulum all the way to the other side, and we were doing the exact same thing every week because our teams are wiped out. We went to the cookie cutter model, right? And now we've kind of swung back into the middle, saying, hey, for the next month, let's try this thing. And at least we're doing it often enough that we're going to get some ROI from learning this, and we're not changing it up. So we kind of swung over that pendulum and kind of right now feel we're in a good place. But that was a lesson learned and a bit of a failure going through that. Okay, now that Garrett's answered, reopening. What is something that you guys are doing, and maybe you have reopened or you're going to reopen, regardless of where you are? What is something as you reopen, production-wise, that you feel is a best practice you guys need to do?
I can go first. Ben, I love what you said about a pendulum. Like, I love using that word because churches do that so much. And the idea that we were, super exhausted doing that and kind of moving around and then moving into the cookie cutter model and trying to swing back and trying to always land us somewhere in the middle is what we want to do as production people. And that's hard. But we opened, it was actually in the beginning of July with all of our campuses at a 25% capacity. And we have a really unique model where we actually broadcast from one of two locations every other week. So we have two broadcast sites. It gets very complicated and messy, but for the most part, it works. And I would say, as we looked at what we were going to do differently when we opened versus in February, what we were doing, we tried to staff as many full-time and part-time people at that broadcast site on the weekend. Because I'm not going to lie, when we got back, it felt like I was learning how to ride a bike again. And even though we had already been doing this for months, I was like, holy cow, there is so much stuff that we're missing. And we all kind of walked out and fell on the couch on Sunday afternoon. Like, that was nuts, And so as we started to staff more people on it and have, and if you're listening to this and you don't have tons of staff, but you have volunteers, bring as many volunteers as you can, even if they're just there standing with you, because it's so helpful to have more people than what you need for what we're doing, especially when it feels like we're trying to relearn how to ride a bike. And so as we've done that, it's made a lot of things better, and it's allowed us not to be so scattered on the weekend with some of the things that each production person is working on, and they can focus very exclusively on that. And so if you've got a broadcast audio guy, you got a broadcast video guy, a guy switching for the room and a guy mixing for the room, it's like, how can we staff it in a way that takes a lot more load off? And we were kind of, it didn't feel as important maybe in February to do that. It was like, yeah, we got it. It's no problem. We do this every week. And now it's like, we're looking at this differently. So staff it differently,
I think if just tagging on to for volunteers, I think we've learned a lot as for us production managers. We became the operators. We became camera operators, and we're all those little details that we usually coach a volunteer to do. And we learned a lot. I think for me, I learned that there needs to be an extra layer of training for our volunteers as we're coming back. I mean, they've been out of the room for 5-6 months. And that's, like you were saying, like for us, it might feel like, okay, we're coming back. We're kind of getting back in the swing of things. Can you imagine for them? So really adding a layer of training now that we've learned certain different things for broadcasts and kind of how to make things a little bit easier for them, but still keeping a level of excellence, putting some extra thought on how do we train them? How do we make an easy onboard experience for them as they're coming back and new people who want to join the team, and really create that excitement behind this is not as scary. Like doing production after COVID should not be scary, and coach them through that and really train them to become excellent, not perfect, but excellent, and just continue to push through for our in-room experiences now.
So to tag off that when it comes to the volunteers, one of the things that we've landed on for best practices is pushing for less volunteer turnover. So previously we're heavily volunteer run, and so we'd have volunteers switching out between services on mid Sunday. And so for a couple of reasons, one of the two big practices that we're planning to come back with is pushing volunteers serve less often, but for longer in the day. And for one of two reasons. One, you have less chances of cross contamination with people because you have less people coming in and out. You have the teams are already going to be around each other, so just probability it keeps the numbers a little bit lower. And two, it's a higher level of excellence. Because I mean, usually when you have the same team, your first service is the roughest, and so you get better as you go, and hopefully that first service is a run through. And so if you've got that same team that carries through the whole day, you should be able to keep a solid level the entire day. Versus if you're constantly having someone rotate out, you're going to lose some chemistry, you're going to lose some of that production level. And the other big thing for us is our communicators are people. And so like in Miami, it's very natural to speak to a person. And so one of the things that we're